This case takes place in South Africa on the 20th of July 1985. Some of you may recognise the name of this case, as we did briefly mention it in our history channel. However, it is a relatively unknown one, especially to those outside of South Africa. Makkie Skhosana was a 23-year-old woman who lived in Duduza, South Africa. She was a single mother and worked at a leather factory. She would often work over 10 hours a day to support her family. During this time, South Africa was coming towards the end of apartheid, and tensions were incredibly high. Even when the British Empire abolished slavery in 1833 for the enslaved black South Africans, it was merely a change in status from slave to indentured labourer. A number of laws would be passed in the various South African colonies to restrict the rights of black South Africans. The Union of South Africa, the precursor to the modern South African state, restricted black people from owning land, from voting, and where they could live. After the Second World War, further laws enforcing segregation were passed. Apartheid as a system would begin in 1948. The goal of apartheid was simple: to maintain white Afrikaner dominance over the majority black population. Apartheid in the Afrikaans language means apartness, and the laws would seek to segregate along racial lines. There was to be distinct social, political, and economic roles for white and black South Africans. All parts of life were segregated, interracial marriage was banned, and black South Africans were forced out of their homes into black-only slums. For the minority white population, life was considerably better than the experiences of the black South Africans. One of the key forces in South Africa opposing apartheid was the African National Congress, or the ANC. Protest was usually met with violence by the apartheid government, with protesters often killed. From burning government-issued identification to armed revolutionary activities, the ANC engaged in many forms of protest to rid the country of apartheid. The leader of the ANC, Nelson Mandela, was arrested and imprisoned multiple times, his longest stretch being from 1964 until 1990, though he continued to lead the ANC from behind bars. As international condemnation for apartheid grew, the regime sought ever more oppressive means to cling to power. The 1980s saw the ANC attempt to make black South Africans ungovernable. Violent protests and a rise in militant youth groups led to the collapse of local governance. This was met with punishments like whippings and hangings for anti-apartheid acts. Many black South Africans united to bring apartheid to an end, but for those who were seen to side with the apartheid government could face mob justice, and sometimes people would be falsely accused. In 1985, Duduza was considered to be one of the poorest and most overcrowded communities in South Africa. There were no roads, nor sewage system, and only a handful of people had access to electricity. The poverty in the area led to a rise in crime, and with the rise in crime came a deep disdain for law enforcement. According to some sources, the township of Duduza once had dozens of police officers. However, they were forced out of the area. Their homes were said to be easily identifiable, as all that was left were burned-out shells of timber, brick and metal. The police would patrol the area, but only in armoured vehicles. The police were also known to be rather violent. There are reports of people being shot by the police and left for hours to die. However, forcing out the police caused other problems. Vigilante and mob justice were known to occur, so violence was still very much rife. The people of the town could sometimes become the judge, jury, and executioners. This would sometimes lead to innocent people being killed. On the 20th of July 1985, Makkie attended the funerals of a number of political activists that had recently died. According to some sources, Makkie was a member of a community organisation affiliated with the United Democratic Front. The Front was an anti-apartheid body that incorporated many anti-apartheid organisations. She was also affiliated with the African National Congress. Around a month before the funeral, a stranger came to Duduza. This mysterious man told people in the township that he had access to some weaponry. He went on to tell some people that he was a member of the Spear of the Nation, the military wing of the outlawed African National Congress. which at the time was the main underground movement fighting white rule. He also mentioned that he was visiting the township to look for recruits. According to some, Mackie introduced this man to people in Dedusa, and some sources say she was even in a relationship with the man. This man then recruited some people from the township, gave them hand grenades, and showed them how to use them. The plan was for the recruits to attack the homes of policemen. The mysterious man distributed the grenades and told the recruits to attack the officers at midnight. On the night of the planned attack, the recruits separated to hit their targets at around the same time in different villages. One of the targets was in Dedusa. In a neighbouring village, one of the recruits approached an officer's house, and he pulled out the pin of the grenade. But as he did, it exploded in his hands, killing him instantly. In another village, 3 recruits were told to attack an officer's home, and those grenades exploded in their hands too, resulting in their deaths. A building in Dedusa was also supposed to be attacked, but the attack was broken up by the sudden arrival of police. All 4 of the recruits were killed. All of the recruits were left in the streets. The police didn't bother taking them to a morgue. Instead, they were left to be eaten by wild dogs. The matter was investigated, and it turned out that the grenades that the mysterious man had given the recruits were tampered with, so they would detonate the second the pin was removed. This created a number of rumours, as those in the area speculated how this could have happened. People began talking, and as they did, it came out that Mackie had introduced the mysterious weapon supplier to the recruits, and that apparently she was in a relationship with him. It became apparent to some that this man was an undercover police informant, and that Mackie was in on it too. People theorized that Mackie could have had a hand in their demise, and that she tipped off the police with this man. Mackie vehemently denied these rumors, but that didn't stop people from believing it to be true. Before too long, plans were made to burn down her house. Mackie was told by those close to her that she should leave the area as soon as possible, but she refused. Mackie believed that if she were to flee the area, it would make those who accused her and those who were on the fence about her involvement certain that she was guilty, and she was adamant that she had done nothing. In fact, Mackie was innocent. She had not tipped off any officers that night, or any night for that matter. She too was set up and used. So on the day of the funeral on the 20th of July, Mackie decided to attend, something she was warned against. Many who cared for her saw the danger she was putting herself in and begged her to leave the town. Shortly after arriving at the funeral, Mackie was chased and attacked by those in attendance. She ran into a nearby field before being thrown to the ground. What unfolded is hard to even describe. Mackie was horrendously beaten for some time with rocks and sticks, as well as being punched, kicked, and stomped on. She was surrounded by dozens of people, all of whom were calling for her death. A tire was placed around her neck, and the tire was doused in gasoline. It was then set alight. Flames engulfed Mackie's head and face. Some of the men there then picked up a large and heavy rock and used the rock to pin Mackie down so she couldn't move. The mob then retrieved large shards of broken glass and forced that glass into Mackie's genitals. The flames engulfed Mackie's body, and she was continuously beaten with sticks and rocks. It took some time for Mackie to succumb to her injuries, and after she died in the most horrific of ways, another large rock was used to cave her face in. During the brutal attack, every single one of her teeth were knocked out. The attack was recorded, photographed, and televised. A TV film crew was able to document most of what happened. Some of the footage is relatively hard to find, but you can certainly find it if you look hard enough. It is poor quality, but it is some of the most horrifying footage I have ever seen, and it left me deeply sickened. In the footage you see Mackie being repeatedly kicked, stomped, pelted with stones, and punched. Some of the people there jump on her head repeatedly. Mackie's sister recalls the day that she found her sister dead. She said at a hearing in 1997, "When I approached the gravesite, I saw her body. I approached her from the feet, and I could identify her just from that. I could identify her as my sister. I couldn't see her face because there was a large rock on top of it, as well as on her chest. I went round to try and identify the body further, and I was disgusted at the way she was killed. I discovered that all of her teeth were missing, and before she died she had 32 teeth and did not have a tooth missing. She had a huge gap in her head, and she was also incredibly injured. She was scorched by the fire and had been gruesomely beaten to death. I went to a nearby house. I asked them to give me some papers so I could cover my sister's body at the gravesite. What happened to Maki is something called necklacing, and her death was the first time that necklacing had been caught on camera. Images of her death were filmed by the South African Broadcasting Corporation and were used by the apartheid state media in anti-resistance propaganda. Kevin Carter, the photographer who captured the infamous vulture and the girl image, also captured a number of photographs of the murder of Maki. Kevin Carter would later take his own life due to the horrors that he had witnessed in South Africa. In the note that he left, he said, "Life's plan supersedes joyfulness to the point that joy no longer exists." The practice of necklacing was continued by some members of the African National Congress. It was usually carried out against those who had betrayed the organization, who had in some way sided with the apartheid regime, or helped the regime continue to oppress. In other examples, the condemned would be bound with barbed wire as to prevent escape. In some cases, the victim could take as long as 20 minutes to succumb to the horrific burns they would endure. In addition, the tire would continue to burn long after the person's passing, making identification of the victim even more difficult. The practice was officially condemned by the ANC, though the once wife of Nelson Mandela, Winnie, was quoted as saying, "Through our boxes of matches and necklaces, we shall liberate this country." And as I said, the first recorded victim of necklacing was Maki Skhosana. The case of Maki is considered to be one of the worst in South African history. It was certainly shocking to read about and research. To show someone such cruelty with little evidence of any wrongdoing is disturbing and highlights the horrifying issues with mob justice, as things can get incredibly out of hand incredibly fast. Necklacing has to be one of the most horrific ways to kill someone. The murder of Maki is considered to be the most gruesome murders to ever be televised. It was later established by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that Maki was innocent, and she was falsely accused by the mysterious man, who was actually named Joe. Joe had orchestrated the whole thing and engineered the false accusations against Maki. Sadly, I couldn't find any images of Maki alive. I did look for some time, but I just couldn't find any that were available. In the end, her name was cleared, and she and her family were no longer seen as traitors. Maki was buried in the same graveyard that she was killed in, and necklacing as a form of execution is still used to this day.